I want to talk about pausing and thinking in our lives. And I also want to talk about a few tools that I've developed to work through a lot of my pain that I've had. So you might have tuned into some of my other YouTube videos, but I have a couple of them out there, and it really talks about the disconnect from where we are in our lives and where we would like to be. So there's a gap, and I call that gap suffering, because we're either dealing with pain or we're wanting, striving, or we're beating ourselves up. So we talk about that. One of the things that I like to do to try to work through that stuff is, first of all, name it, okay? If I'm feeling sad, if I'm feeling angry, if I'm feeling powerless over a certain situation, if I'm feeling hopeless, which happens, but not often, name it. So when you name it, I think that's one of the first steps to dealing with it and being able to catch yourself. So when you can identify it and put it in front of you to the point where you're able to start addressing it, it really makes a big difference. So we also talked about blockage, okay? Blockage in our lives happens when part of our suffering holds us back from the life we're trying to live or want to live or think we could be living. So one of the tools that I came up with is a spreadsheet called Unhappiness.xlsx. I started doing this like 17 years ago. Very, very, very effective for me. I actually refresh it right around once a year. So that's something that you're going to be able to see on my website that's going to be coming up in a few weeks. So when we talk about trying to work through some of our pain and some of the things that we're stuck on, if we can name it, if we can start to write it down and identify it, it really makes a big difference. You know, I have a journal that I try to write in every day, makes a big difference in my life. So if we talk about blockage, how do we get through blockage? I want to talk about a few different tools that I use. One of the tools I use is the notion of I try not to judge, blame, or assume. Because I've done this before, I try not to do it now. And it really makes a difference when you can. If you can drop your assumptions at the surface level and maybe go try to find out for yourself exactly what's going on, you can better deal with reality and maybe not make a problem or a mistake along the way. In business, there's a famous saying, how does it go? It's the issue isn't the problem. The problem is how you respond to the issue. So a lot of times, the thing that happens between a relationship or with somebody in the community or your family or even at work, that's not really the problem. It's how people respond to it, how you treat it. You know, if you're a leader or a boss, like I was always extremely mindful of how I addressed a certain situation that I heard about, trying not to make any assumptions. So an example I have is I ride bicycles, duh. So I'm out there riding my bicycle on the street, and this has been kind of a viewpoint of mine for almost 20 years. People run me off the road almost. People are driving through stop signs. People are texting on their phone. I don't know. They're up to something, and it used to really aggravate me, and it used to make me mad, and maybe I'd try to chase them down, silly, crazy, road rage me on a bicycle, but I don't do that anymore. Because the reality is, we don't know what people are going through. People might really be trying to handle something really tough. Their kid might be sick. Their kid might have just died. Their mom might be in the hospital. They might be rushing to get to the hospital. They might have just lost their job. We don't know. So it's that judging, blaming, and assuming. We don't know. And another example I'll give is one of the earlier videos I talked about my mother. And you can go back and look at that story. But to continue that story, my mom was homeless on the streets of Baltimore City for 10 years. And in regards to judging, blaming, and assuming, I would be riding my bike downtown Baltimore. Usually I went down there a couple times a week for something, either something good or something bad. And I got really good at identifying her shape. She was hunched over. She'd kind of shuffle around, pushing her little wire basket, vertical basket, with her whole life shoved in there. And I saw her. And I tried to ride on the other side of the street or avoid her. I could pretty much pick out her shape 2 blocks away. But I couldn't avoid her. You know, my radar for her was on high alert whenever I went downtown, because the interaction between her and me was always a lose-lose. So I tried to avoid her. But as good as my radar was, you know, I think a mom's radar for their kid is a whole nother level. And I'd be on the other side of the street, 4 lanes of traffic, and I'd hear her, "Roger." And I'd turn around, "Hi, Mom." And I'd kind of deal with that. But she was this dirty, disheveled bag lady for 10 years. And people would judge and blame and assume all day long. And that's a little relevant these days. But, you know, people that are out there on the street, that's somebody's mother or somebody's father or somebody's kid or somebody's brother or sister. So again, people can think whatever they want, you know. I'm not saying anything. You guys can do whatever you want. I'm not saying that. But the judging, blaming, and assuming, you know, really try to pull that one in. The next tool that I want to talk about, a couple tools, is I was working with a couple friends lately, and they were really having some tough time with some relationships at home or with other people. And I have 2 things that I do. One of them is I call 1-pager 2 columns. It's a piece of paper. You draw a line down the middle, you draw a line on the top, you put a header on both sides, and for yourself, it's called good and bad, okay? What are the things that you're doing that are good for you? Exercise, sleep, good nutrition, hydration, talking to your friends, trying to find moments of peace, calm, and beauty in your life so you release some of the stress, however you do that. And on the bad side, it might be something like, for me, I never buy half a gallon of ice cream because that ain't lasting. If I can do a pint, I'm all right, okay? When I spend too much time on social media just surfing around, that's not good for me either, okay? There's a lot of things. When I eat a lot of fried food instead of my greens, you know, whenever I eat greens, I feel much better. It's like a miracle. So there's that. For yourself, things that are good for you, things that are bad for you, just to identify it. Write it down on a piece of paper. We're not necessarily changing the world. We're calling it out, we're naming it, and then you have something to look at and refer to that hopefully you can use throughout your day to help keep you on the right path. The other sheet that I do, again, 1-pager 2 columns, this one is wants and needs. There's been some situations in my life, and I have some friends going through some tough stuff, either with kids or spouses or some sort of relationship, where you get into a position where if you had to identify what you really need out of this relationship versus what you want out of the relationship, and if you're being brutally honest, you can really make some headway. You know, the biggest problem in all relationships, even businesses, I've done business improvement sessions all over the world in all different industries. It's always the same problem: communication, relationships, communication. So if you can say clearly, this is what I need, this is what I want, and they can kind of choose, it makes a big difference, okay? You can contact me through Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. My website will be up in a week or 2. Check that out. Probably be out by the time you watch this, some of you. So check it out. Thanks for listening, and You guys go do great shit today.